Dr. Priya Kapoor stepped into the influenza surveillance laboratory just after sunrise, the hum of freezers and the faint odor of ethanol greeting her like old friends. She set down her coffee mug and approached her workstation. A polished metal desk strewn with color-coded binders, stacks of printouts mapping viral lineage trees, and 3 weathered notebooks filled with her meticulous field observations. Each notebook, lined in red, blue, and green, represented months of work. Daily records from remote clinics in Vietnam, temperature and humidity readings at regional wet markets, and patient symptom logs from rural India. Before booting up her computer, Priya reached for the topmost notebook, its leather binding soft from nightly use. She flipped through pages of handwritten tables, detailed maps sketching migratory bird routes, and margin notes speculating on environmental triggers for zoonotic spillover. Every entry had been cross-checked against lab assay results, field interviews, and satellite data, an intricate tapestry of multidisciplinary evidence she had woven herself. Today was the deadline for her university's grant renewal application, and she intended to submit her proposal, complete with preliminary model outputs demonstrating early warning signals for emerging influenza strains. With a satisfied nod, Priya tapped her computer's biometric scanner. The machine whirred, then displayed her desktop, folders labeled Field Data 2023, Lab Assays Q1, and Prelim Algorithm Scripts. She double-clicked the Master Notebook Backup folder, confident her nightly backups had secured every digital copy of her work. But as folders loaded, she noticed an ominous disk cleanup utility popping up unbidden on her screen, its progress bar marching steadily through the Research Documents directory. Alarm prickled through her. Before she could intervene, a system notification flashed. Automatic purge complete. Recovered space. 1.2 GB. Her breath caught as she clicked on Research Documents, only to find the folder empty. Her binders of scanned charts were gone, her code files wiped, and the subfolder Expert Notebooks reduced to a single cryptic log entry. Files deleted by system maintenance. Panic surged. Priya rifled through her physical notebooks, still intact on her desk. But the IT purge had also corrupted the lab's main server, erasing the corresponding digital scans she'd relied on for remote collaboration. Her months of work, the foundation of her predictive algorithm, had vanished in an instant. The grant deadline loomed in 72 hours. Staring at the blank directory, Priya felt a cold dread settle in her chest. Yet beneath the shock, a familiar determination ignited. She would reclaim her research, piece by piece, and prove that no bureaucratic glitch or deliberate erasure could silence the patterns she was destined to uncover. Each evening after her lab mates had gone home, Priya returned to the now deserted surveillance laboratory, her backpack heavy with fresh printouts she'd painstakingly retrieved from clinics and open-access databases throughout the day. The earliest twilight filtered through the high windows as she spread her physical field notebooks across the metal bench. The red-lined one with daily case counts from Vietnamese clinics, the blue for environmental readings at market stalls, and the green for patient symptom logs collected in rural India. Beside them lay stacks of freshly downloaded CSV files, regional influenza incidents by district, poultry farm census data, and daily temperature-humidity readings scraped from the National Weather Service API. Priya switched on her laptop, its battery last charged in better times, and opened a new Jupyter notebook. Line by line, she began to re-enter the raw figures she had lost. 32 villages' weekly case counts, each figure carefully typed and double-checked. The corresponding date, location coordinates, and sample metadata. She paused frequently to sip from her cold coffee cup, mind racing to recall exact values from memory when printouts were incomplete. In the margins of her physical notebooks, she jotted reminders. Recontact doctor. Guyan for week 7 metabolite assay. And verify market IDs against lab inventory, DexLSX. Once the core epidemiological table was reconstructed, Priya moved on to demographic inputs. Age distributions, population densities, mobile phone movement data. She'd aggregated via nightly scripts. She retrieved a thumb drive containing archived raw logs from her home folder, untouched by the purge, and imported them into her rebuilding pipeline. As the lines of code executed, she watched the data frame assemble before her, each column restored to its proper schema. With the foundational tables in place, Priya turned to her predictive algorithm, the very script she had intended to refine for her grant proposal. She opened predict_charm_pandemic.py, a Python script where she'd defined functions to compute rolling basic reproduction numbers, R0, and to train a Gaussian process model on spillover risk factors. She rewrote the data loading routines to point at her newly reassembled CSVs and spent the next 2 hours debugging missing value errors and column name mismatches that arose from manual data entry. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she patched the pre-processing pipeline, adding imputation logic for occasional gaps and normalizing variables to the scales required by scikit-learn. By midnight, Priya's console displayed a reassuring message. Data loaded successfully. 14,752 records, 12 features. She exhaled and executed the initial model training loop. The GPU in her workstation fan whirred as the algorithm processed the data, yielding preliminary outputs. A time series of predicted spillover probabilities for each district, complete with uncertainty bounds. Her heart leapt when she saw the first plot render, a heat map showing elevated risk in a cluster of wet markets she had originally flagged in her lost notes. Leaning back, Priya felt both exhaustion and triumph. In 48 hours of relentless work, retyping data, re-engineering code, and debugging models, she had resurrected the essence of her erased research. The reconstructed algorithm not only matched her earlier results, but promised even greater robustness. The rebuilt data pipeline incorporated more rigorous validation steps and logging, ensuring that no future accident could sweep away her progress so completely. As the first light of dawn slipped into the lab, Priya saved her work, committing the new notebooks and scripts to a secure, cloud-backed repository. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, imagining the patterns lurking within the data. Patterns she would soon use to forecast emerging outbreaks. Her erased notebooks lay around her like silent witnesses to her resolve. She picked up the red-lined field book and, with a steady hand, wrote on its cover in bold letters, "Rebuilt by memory, do not delete." Late that afternoon, after her reconstructed dataset had passed initial sanity checks, Priya initiated the first full run of her predictive algorithm. She opened her Jupyter notebook and executed the cell labeled Run Spillover Detection. The console printed progress bars as the model processed 12 months of historical influenza incidents, avian livestock co-occurrence indices, and daily humidity temperature composites for each geographic grid cell. When the computation completed, Priya instructed the code to generate a ranked list of the top 10 high-risk areas. As the list scrolled into view, her breath caught. The algorithm had assigned an unusually high spillover probability, over 78%, to a cluster of markets and poultry farms in the Mekong Delta region of Vietnam, precisely the area she had least expected. She cross-referenced the grid IDs against her field notes, the same wet market stalls where, months earlier, she had observed atypical avian mortality but had lacked sufficient data to flag a concern. With a few keystrokes, Priya produced a heat map overlay on a GIS map. Deep crimson hotspots smothered the delta's waterways, while surrounding provinces glowed in amber. She ran the uncertainty quantification routine next, a series of Monte Carlo draws that propagated measurement noise through the Gaussian process model. The resulting confidence intervals remained narrow, plus 5%, indicating a robust signal unlikely to be a statistical fluke. Her pulse quickened. This pattern was buried deep in the interplay of migratory bird density, seasonal rainfall, and small-scale poultry trading networks, dimensions overlooked by conventional epidemiological models. Priya zoomed in on timestamps. The cluster's risk had begun climbing subtly 6 weeks ago, then accelerated sharply after the recent monsoon surge. She bookmarked these visualizations and data tables, preparing slides for her upcoming departmental seminar. Despite the earlier erasure of her notebooks, Priya now held compelling, quantitative evidence that her algorithm could detect emergent zoonotic spillover before any human case was reported. Leaning back, she whispered to the empty lab, "We're onto something big." That evening, Buoyed by her algorithm's startling prediction, Priya Kapoor prepared to present her findings at the weekly epidemiology seminar hosted by the Department of Global Health. She arrived early to the wood-panelled conference room, set up her laptop, and imported her GIS heat maps and spillover probability time series into a pristine slide deck. At 4 p.m., as colleagues filtered in, postdocs clutching coffee mugs, senior faculty scrolling on tablets, Priya took a steadying breath. With the room in semi-darkness, she clicked to her first slide, an ominous map of the Mekong Delta, overlaid with deep crimson hotspots. Colleagues, she began, voice measured, as you can see, our reconstructed dataset and predictive model indicate a 78% probability of zoonotic spillover in this region within the next fortnight. Gasps rippled through the audience. She advanced to a time series chart showing the metric's steady climb over 6 weeks, from a baseline of 12% to the current spike. This uptick coincides with recent monsoon flooding and increased free-range poultry movements, she explained, highlighting correlation coefficients and p-values in small type. A murmur rose. Dr. Edwards, a venerable professor with 3 decades of field experience, leaned forward, fingers steepled. Dr. Kapoor, your model is impressive, but are you suggesting we issue a formal alert based solely on algorithmic output? We have no confirmed human cases. His tone was polite but firm, a reminder that institutional caution trumped premature alarms. Priya nodded, anticipating skepticism. I'm not advocating panic. Rather, I propose a targeted surveillance operation. Deploy rapid response sampling teams to the identified markets and test both avian and human contacts. Early detection could enable containment before human-to-human transmission begins. She clicked to slides detailing a proposed protocol: nasal and cloacal swabs, field PCR assays, and interim quarantine measures for suspected positives. Each step was meticulously costed and time-bound, with data collection responsibilities delineated by local partners. An assistant professor, Dr. Lin, raised her hand. The logistics are sound, but our funding cycle for field operations closed last month. We'd need emergency funds, and convincing the grants committee on short notice is unlikely. The faculty table exchanged glances. Faces reflected the bureaucratic maze of university grants and external contracts. Priya switched slides to a draft preprint she'd prepared for a rapid publication server, complete with DOI placeholder and under-review watermark. In parallel, I've submitted these results as a preprint to ensure transparency and invite global collaboration. If we wait for formal grant approval, we risk missing this critical window. She distributed QR codes linking to her open access manuscript. At that, the department chair, Dr. Novak, furrowed his brow. Dr. Kapoor, he said, while transparency is admirable, premature publication could jeopardize relationships with the Ministry of Health and local authorities. They may perceive our warnings as alarmist or undermining ongoing surveillance efforts. His words hung heavy. The balance between academic openness and political propriety. Sensing rising tension, Priya pressed on, switching to her final slide. A map of potential downstream spread routes via major river traffic and cross-border trade corridors. This is more than a local concern. An undetected spillover here could seed the next global health emergency. Our department's reputation for predictive modelling is at stake. Either we act proactively, or we risk being accused of inaction when cases inevitably appear. Silence followed. The weight of her words settled over the room like a gathering storm. Dr. Edwards exhaled slowly. You've built a compelling case, he conceded, but institutional inertia runs deep. I fear your proposal will be tabled until next quarter's budget review. Priya's heart sank, but she maintained her composure. With respect, sir, time is not on our side. I'm prepared to coordinate a small detection pilot at our own cost, leveraging my discretionary research funds and partners at the field clinics. I ask only for departmental endorsement and facilitation of permits. A beat passed. Then, Doctor. Lin spoke quietly. I'll join you in the field. My lab can provide the mobile PCR units. Another hand rose, Dr. Ahmed, a virologist known for his bold initiatives, adding, Count me in. I'll arrange for biosafety level 3 supplies through my contacts at the Public Health Agency. The room shifted. What began as polite dismissal transformed into a reluctant consensus. Colleagues rallied to her support once the personal stakes became clear. Dr. Novak cleared his throat. Very well. Devise a limited pilot plan. Maximum 3 people, 2 weeks in the field, expenses capped at $5,000. If your pilot yields confirmatory results, we'll escalate for full funding. Priya allowed herself a cautious smile. Against institutional pushback, she had secured the bare minimum endorsement needed to move forward. As the seminar adjourned, colleagues lingered to offer encouragement and share contact information. Outside the conference room, Priya exhaled deeply, knowing that tomorrow she and her volunteer team would depart for Vietnam on a shoestring budget, racing against the very clock her erased notebooks had first set in motion. Within 48 hours of Priya's pilot team arriving in the Mekong Delta, local clinics began reporting clusters of patients with severe respiratory symptoms, fever, cough, and rapid onset dyspnea, far exceeding the region's typical influenza. Caseload. On the evening of Day 7, the district hospital in Can Tho admitted its first 10 suspected cases and forwarded nasopharyngeal swabs to the Provincial Virology Centre. By midnight, real-time RT-PCR assays detected a novel influenza A subtype bearing genetic markers indicative of avian to human reassortment. Exactly the zoonotic signature Priya's model had flagged. At dawn, news alerts splashed across global health bulletins. Mekong Delta outbreak, novel influenza strain confirmed, and researchers rushed to contain spillover. Priya awoke to an avalanche of notifications, SMS updates from her field team, confirming case counts had climbed to 30 by morning, emergency use advisories issued by Vietnam's Ministry of Health, and the first panicked headline on ProMed Mail. She immediately posted an addendum to her preprint, appending live case count data and phylogenetic trees of the new virus, along with updated spillover risk forecasts for adjacent provinces. Meanwhile, regional health authorities, initially skeptical, convened an urgent briefing with Priya via satellite video link. She walked them through her algorithm's projection of spread corridors following riverboat routes and predicted weekly incidence curves under different intervention scenarios. As she overlaid mobile phone mobility heat maps atop her risk maps, officials in white coats nodded gravely. Your model's hotspots match exactly where reports are emerging, they confirmed. Within hours, the Ministry of Health integrated Priya's algorithm into its early warning dashboard, routing real-time sensor feeds into centralized command centers for targeted surveillance and resource allocation. By the third day of confirmed human cases, the World Health Organization issued a Level 2 watch for the novel strain, citing Priya's published forecast as instrumental in accelerating their response. International aid agencies dispatched rapid deployment teams to Mekong Delta clinics, armed with antivirals and field PCR kits calibrated to the virus's genetic signature she had shared. Journalists, once dismissive, now hailed her as the woman who saw the pandemic coming. In emergency sessions at the UN's Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network, member states unanimously adopted Priya's open-source algorithm for deployment in other high-risk zones, affirming that her once-erased research had become the world's most effective predictive tool against pandemic threats. Within hours of integrating Priya's predictive hotspots into national surveillance, the first confirmed cases of the novel influenza strain began to surface exactly where her model had forecasted. On the morning of Day 2, Can Tho Provincial Hospital admitted 24 patients presenting with high fever, severe cough, and acute respiratory distress. Nurses and clinicians, following Priya's recommended sampling protocol, collected nasal and throat swabs, which were expedited to the regional BSL-3 laboratory, established only a week earlier at Priya's urging. By mid-afternoon, the RT-PCR assays returned positive for an uncharacterized influenza A subtype. Genetic sequencing, shared immediately via the open access portal Priya had published, revealed a mosaic genome combining avian H5 and human H3 segments, confirming zoonotic reassortment. As technicians reviewed the sequence alignments, Priya mobilized her data dashboard. She overlaid the emergent case locations onto her original spillover risk map and watched in grim satisfaction as the real-world cluster mirrored her crimson hotspot. News of the laboratory confirmation broke in both local press and global health channels. Headlines proclaimed, "Predicted outbreak emerges in Mekong," and "Kapoor's algorithm validated as novel flu strain explodes." International aid organisations, referencing Priya's risk corridors, mapped along key riverboat routes, deployed mobile field units to secondary towns. These teams, armed with rapid antigen tests calibrated to the new strain, began community-wide screening and early isolation measures exactly where Priya's model had flagged elevated risk. Within 48 hours, the World Health Organization issued a Level 2 influenza alert for the region, specifically citing the forecast-validated intervention framework developed by Dr. Priya Kapoor. Member states were encouraged to adopt her open-source algorithm. The United Nations Digital Health Agency integrated her code into its real-time surveillance platform, enabling frontline health workers in Southeast Asia to receive push notification alerts on mobile devices when case counts in their grid cell exceeded predefined thresholds. Meanwhile, Priya's home institution convened an emergency virtual symposium, drawing hundreds of researchers, policymakers, and data scientists. Priya demonstrated live model recalibrations incorporating the newly confirmed case data, showing how risk probabilities downstream along the Mekong corridor had now risen from 20% to over 65%. She guided officials through scenario simulations, one assuming targeted antiviral distribution to the top 5 at-risk districts, another modelling school closures and market restrictions. As dusk fell over Kantho, mobile clinics, deployed according to Priya's riverine movement forecasts, began administering prophylactic antivirals to exposed poultry workers and elderly residents. The first containment line was drawn not arbitrarily, but along the precise boundaries her algorithm had drawn in code and GIS layers. And though the outbreak's shadows loomed large, the genetic confirmation of her predicted hotspot marked a turning point. What had begun as a vanishing of her work had emerged, phoenix-like, as the world's most powerful tool against an unfolding pandemic. 2 years later, Dr. Priya Kapoor stood at the front of the cavernous WHO Emergency Operations Centre in Geneva, the only woman among a panel of global health directors and data scientists. Behind her, a giant digital world map tracked waves of outbreak alerts, each dot pulsing in time with new data feeds from her algorithm now deployed in 50 countries. In the hush before she began, Priya felt the weight of every erased notebook, every midnight reconstruction, and every skeptical glance she'd overcome to arrive at this moment. She took a steadying breath and addressed the assembly. "Colleagues, friends," her voice rang clear across the room. "When I first lost my research to a system purge, I feared the patterns we sought would vanish along with my data. But the drive to rebuild showed me that insight cannot be erased. It must be defended and shared." She clicked a remote, and the map zoomed to highlight areas where her predictive model had averted potential pandemics. A respiratory virus outbreak in Cameroon contained through rapid antiviral distribution, a hemorrhagic fever cluster in the Amazon forest halted by early wildlife sampling, a novel coronavirus strain in Mongolia mitigated before human-to-human spread. As she spoke, the audience watched laser-sharp heat maps and time-lapse sequences demonstrating successive waves of intervention. Priya narrated each scenario, how field teams had been dispatched along the precise tributaries her code had flagged, how local clinics had activated surge capacity exactly when her real-time alerts crossed critical thresholds, and how, as a result, case counts remained in the dozens rather than exploding into the hundreds or thousands. Clinical directors who had once doubted her now nodded in solemn agreement, recalling the toll exacted by slower, conventional surveillance. She concluded by unveiling the new Global Predictive Analytics Consortium, a WHO-backed initiative bringing together governments, academic centres, and open-source communities to continuously refine the algorithm's inputs, ranging from migratory bird telemetry to urban wastewater surveillance. "Our mission," she declared, "is not merely to predict the next epidemic, but to democratize that foresight. No longer will any nation stand waiting for cases to appear before action. Together, We will anticipate, prepare, and protect. The applause was thunderous. As Priya stepped down, delegates surged forward to shake her hand. Ministers of health praising her vision, NGO leaders thanking her for saving lives, data engineers eager to contribute new sensor networks. Outside the centre, press gathered under banner headlines. Kapoor's code shields the world, and From Lost Notebooks to Global Guardian. Later that evening, Priya walked along the Rhone River under the soft glow of lantern-lit streets. She paused on a stone bridge, watching water swirl beneath the arches, and reflected on how far she had come, from the humiliation of vanished files to the leadership of an entire global early warning system. In her coat pocket, she carried a slim, leather-bound notebook, her first, still stamped, rebuilt by memory, now archived in the WHO Digital Health Library as a symbol of resilience. She smiled at the lantern's reflections dancing on the river's surface, each a reminder that even the smallest spark of data, carefully preserved and shared, could light the path through the darkest of outbreaks. And as she looked ahead, Priya knew the journey was far from over. The world's next pandemic might be unpredictable, but with collective vigilance and open collaboration, its impact need never be unforeseen.